to various things. Bill Clinton was the governor of the state at the time, and so he was, you know, it's in his jurisdiction. But it was with George H.W. Bush, George Bush Jr., Jeb Bush, and Ronald Reagan were also involved in the process. Now, in 1984, he got caught with a large shipment of cocaine, and the CIA seemingly backed away, and he was looking at an incredibly lengthy jail term. So he decided to turn state's evidence, and he was going to turn evidence against George H.W. Bush. He also claimed to have in his possession a videotape of George Bush Jr. and Jeb Bush collecting a large shipment of cocaine from an airstrip in Arkansas, and so obviously this is incredibly damning. The Clintons...
So themselves collecting it?
Apparently so, this is what Barry Seal said. So the Clintons were involved, the Bushes were involved, the Reagans were involved.
Allegedly.
Well, according to Barry Seal, they were involved. Now, this was going to go to trial, and he was given 6 months house arrest leading up to the actual trial. Unfortunately, someone turned up with an Uzi and machine gunned him to death, so we'll never find out the extent of that.
Right. I think there's a quote in Ike's book about Bill Clinton where he says, this is not an exact quote, something like, drugs are not what you think it is, the CIA control it, or something like that.
Yeah, well, which is pretty accurate, basically.
Right.
You know, I mean, the other thing that he was involved in was off the back of the Contra deal. He arranged for the Sandinistas to actually receive a shipment of cocaine directly from Pablo Escobar. Now, this was framing the Sandinistas, and Reagan used this to say, see, it's the Sandinistas that are the drug dealers, that's why we're backing the Contras, when in actual fact it was the Contras that were actually dealing the drugs. Now, what's interesting was this was also at a similar time, this was a sort of a counter-propaganda thing, because the Sandinistas had come across a series of American government documents that proved that Manuel Noriega was a CIA asset in the 60s and the 70s, the dictator of Panama, and he was allowing the CIA to use the Guadalajara cartel in Mexico and ship huge amounts of cocaine through Panama. It was also the money was being laundered from the Contras in the first Inter-Americas Bank, which was also in Panama. The Sandinistas found this and threatened to expose this, and that's why the American government arrested Noriega and threw him in prison for the next 30 years. When his sentence ended, Hillary Clinton personally made sure that he was immediately extradited to France and began another incredibly lengthy sentence. So he's never going to see the light of day. It's probably to cover up his connections.
Right. And the dictator of Panama at that time was
Manuel Noriega.
And a CIA asset,
Absolutely, he was a proven CIA asset throughout the 60s and the 70s, and I would suspect also during the 80s whilst he was involved in this drugs thing, although I imagine that they've tried to memory hold that so as to not show their implicit connection.
All right, Ian, well, some of the terminology that you use I'm not always familiar with. Tell us what the shower posse is.
Well, the shower posse is it's a Jamaican gang. Now this is again, they were actually supplying the east coast of America with a lot of crack and a lot of cocaine and such like that. The shower posse was was founded by a gentleman called Lester Coke, who changed his name to Jim Brown. Jim Brown was a nickname taken after the Raquel Welch.
Lester Coke, founder of the shower posse.
Well, this is him. And what he was he was aligned with the JLP and Edward Siega, who was the JLP is the right-wing party in Jamaica. Now they were opposed to the PNP, which was run by Michael Manley. Now the American government also didn't like the PNP because it reeked of socialism, and we don't like socialism in America. We prefer the right wing. So they were approaching the shower posse. The shower posse made their name by, they would set fire to entire communities. He was also a building contractor, so the shower posse would go in, burn down all these houses, and then go to the government and say, hey, we can rebuild it for a price, obviously. And when they rebuilt it, they made sure that only JLP supporters would move in, and so it's a way of, like, you know, expanding your empire and such like that.
Right.
The CIA started to basically finance them because of their opposition to the PNP, just to use a quote.
And the PNP was supported by Bob Marley?
The PNP was supported by Bob Marley. I mean, CIA agent, just to give you an idea, in the 1980 election, over 1,000 people died in political clashes between PNP and JLP supporters.
How many?
Over 1,000.
Right, okay.
Right, okay. Can you imagine, like, barely that many people actually turn out to vote in England. Like, you know, but CIA agent Philip McGee stated the CIA was using the JLP as its instrument against the Michael Manley government in the late 70s. I would say that most of the violence was coming from the JLP, and behind them was the CIA in terms of getting money and weapons in. The various other Shower Posse members like Cecil Connor claimed to have been trained by the CIA. Little Nut Miller confessed to 9 murders but somehow got away with it, and when he was asked how did you get away with it, he says, well, the American government made me what I am. Basically what they were doing, they were shipping drugs across America from the west coast of America to the east coast of America, providing all the gangs in America with all this next levels of violence, and also shipping massive amounts of cocaine, and they were protected by the American government.
Right. Well, let's just touch on the death of Bob Marley. If you go on Wikipedia and find out how Bob Marley died, it'll say he got an infection in his toe which spread to the rest of the body and he died. He was what, 37 or something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously healthy guy, very, you know, his songs were, let's say, had an element of politics in them.
Yeah.
They were advocating that people don't necessarily follow a government line and all the rest of it, freedom, what have you, and he's involved in this PNP.
But there was basically a free concert that was 1976, arranged by Michael Manley, which Bob Marley was supposed to play. He did actually end up playing. 2 days before it, the Shower Posse attempted to assassinate him. Lester Coke stated that he was paid by the CIA in massive quantities of cocaine to kill Bob Marley.
Right.
Later, obviously, Bob Marley got a cancerous infection in his toe, which then spread and eventually died. In a book called The Covert War on Rock and Roll by Alex Constantine, it suggests that William Colby's son basically gave him some boots, and in the boots was an infected piece of metal. This pierced his skin, and this actually caused the fast causing cancer. Later, he was taken to a doctor that seemed to have some connections to the Nazi Party, and rather than actually, he was giving him a series of injections to the spine, I believe, through his stomach, and looking back on it, the practice was barbaric. So the suggestion is that perhaps this doctor also helped torture him to death rather than aid his recovery.
Okay, so do you think that Bob Marley was murdered?
Yeah, I do think Bob Marley was murdered.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
The Shower Posse as well, they were getting their drugs shipped to them from a cartel in Colombia called the Cali Cartel. The Cali Cartel is intricately tied up with the Colombian government, or was at the time. And one of the things that the Cali Cartel did was they ran death squads that were basically going out at night and killing homeless children to make the cities a more pleasant place to live. Similar thing happened in Brazil just prior to the World Cup, actually. But these things happen. There are death squads that go out and get less desirables off the streets, shall we say. But unfortunately, as I say, we'll never find the true extent of the Shower Posse because he was eventually captured. The Interpol found that he was shipping massive quantities of drugs into America, and he was captured, and he was in a jail cell in Jamaica waiting to be extradited to America, where he could go on trial. The American agents were actually literally en route to pick him up, and unfortunately someone broke into his cell, doused him with petrol and burnt him to death. I think that was in 1992. It certainly appears that this would be to try and hide connections between the CIA, the Shower Posse and drugs.
Okay then, Neil, well, we're going to go for another break, and what have you got for us after the break?
We could talk about the Sinaloa cartel and Mexican cartels, I suppose.
Right. Alright, join us then. Welcome back. I'm talking to Neil Sanders, who is the author of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, all about mind control. And Neil also has a presentation for sale if you want to have a look at that. It's called Welcome to Sell, the Dark Art of Marketing. Just tell us what that is, Neil.
Well, it's I play a character of an evil salesman. It's a satirical piece, basically. I did a presentation at the AV5, which was a sales scenario, a sales seminar, like these guys do, where they're basically teaching, I'll teach you how to maximise your sales potential and stuff like that. So that's basically what I'm doing. But obviously what I'm actually telling you is I'm showing you the tricks that advertisers themselves might use. So. But if I come across as a bit brash and arrogant in there, it's a character.
Okay, well, let's get back to this. We're talking about Well, it's predominantly it's the US we've been discussing.
Yeah,
but
and I think that's mostly because the UK tends to hide it a lot better. Like task forces in America, who would be the people that would go after drugs, and they never go after the sort of the top level people. They always tend to go after users, because basically you've got targets to hit, and it's easier to go and get the same 3 users day in, day out, day out, or whatever, or get people that are buying it rather than supplying it. Because then you get to seize assets. This is the strange thing about task force in America that a lot of people don't realise, is they're self-financed. They don't get financing from the government apart from initially. They make their money from from seizures and forfeitures of profits. So they find a small amount of drugs in here, then basically they can seize all the property, all the money.
There's no drugs in here, Neil.
No, of course there's not. But like they could claim that, and it would be down to me to prove that all of this stuff is not connected to the profits of drugs.
Right.
And so they finance themselves. They have a vested interest in basically seizing a lot of money and a lot of property off people that might not necessarily have the strongest case against them, and then he says you can tie it with plea bargaining and various other 3 strikes and you're out, which is a big thing in America.
Is crack a problem in the UK, or is it powdered cocaine? Is there a difference between crack and bog standard cocaine? I'm not really up on the
crack. The point about here's an interesting thing as well. Okay, crack is you mix it with baking soda and water allegedly, and you boil it down, and basically it makes it a lot stronger, but it also sort of spreads it so that you get more return on your investment, shall we say. Now, when crack first started in 1984, it was a way of, it was originally called freebasing.
I'll just interrupt you a minute, Neil. I'm not advocating, and we are not advocating breaking the law in any way, shape or form pertaining to drugs. We're just discussing the politics of it.
We're not, but Fox News does, and CNN does, and the government does, and I'll tell you for why. You go back and watch any of the when crack first came out.
On a new kind of cocaine called crack. It's going nationwide, especially among the young.
Compared with powdered cocaine used for sniffing, crack is 4 times as strong. 2 or 3 rocks in a vial for as little as $20, ready to smoke.
A new form of cocaine on the streets right now, cheap, powerful, cheap, really strong. Did we tell you how cheap it is? All the time that you see these just say no, war on drugs, all they're actually doing is they're telling you that this is very strong, it's available now, it's like cocaine, so you can be like those rich Hollywood people, like all the film stars, but it's also cheap. Did we mention how cheap and strong it is? Go back and look at any article that talks about crack. It's a marketing campaign.
I think you mentioned a phrase there, just say no. It might be a little bit before your time, I'm not sure, but the whole Grange Hill thing with Samo or Sammy, whatever he was called, there was one of the characters was on, well, probably heroin, I think it was. And there was this massive campaign, just say no, and then they had a song as well.
And when they went to the White House, all the Grange
they went to the White House,
round the back having a joint before they met the president.
What, they were they?
Yeah, they've admitted this. And this is the President Reagan who's basically responsible for the crack explosion. It's a bit, but that's the point. You set yourself up as one thing and basically promote that you're another thing in the public eye.
Right.
I mean, I'll give you an example of that. It would be the Sinaloa cartel. Everybody in America knows that it's the drugs cartels, it's the Mexican cartels. We've already used Guadalajara cartel. The Sinaloa cartel was, again, one of the largest cartels in America. These were the people that we said before providing 90% of the drugs in Chicago, now called Chirac, now a complete, total mess of a city. Financed, set up by the CIA, given protection by the American and the Mexican government. They basically were in cahoots with American Customs and Excise, the ATF, and the CIA, providing apparently intelligence on other cartels, which I don't believe either. It was just a way, this is the public perception. There were actually, Felipe Calderon, El Chapo seemed to be basically, he was the guy that ran the cartel, seemed to be almost bedfellows with him. He got arrested in 1993, and got sent to prison on sort of I forget what the actual charge was. But he lived in that prison like Grouty from Porridge. He ran it. He was like a hotel. Seriously, the prison guards were his servants. Like, people who went to visit him, he made it very, very clear, if I don't want you to leave, you're not leaving. Like, this is my prison, I run it.
Right.
In 2001, he was supposed to be extradited to America. A couple of days before this happened, in a laundry cart, he managed to escape from a maximum security prison. Come on, it never happens. Apparently, as it transpired, he paid off at least 78 prison guards, government officials and police. So he apparently went on the run for about 13 years, although it was during this time that he was actually trading information with the DEA and the CIA and the Mexican government. So this is nonsense. He was actually just propped up by the American government. He was also known to hang out in public places with celebrities and politicians, and his wedding, which was during the time that he was supposedly on the run, was protected by the American army and attended by Mexican and American politicians.
You talk about celebrities. It's fairly well accepted that the cocaine is the drug of choice with a lot of celebrities.
But this is my point. You know, that's all right. It's seen as, oh, it's just that sort of thing. But it's depicted as something entirely different when you're arresting teenagers on a council estate or whatever. But as we look at it, the major problems, like the Sinaloa cartel, are financed by the Americans. Look at Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious was a sting operation that went wrong. Right, the ATF were providing Mexican cartels with over 1,700 machine guns. Right, the idea was that then they might sell these on, and then we might catch them selling these things on, and then we can arrest them. What actually happened was they just used these guns to kill American border patrol guards.
Right.
But that was it.
And you just wanted to mention the Los Zetas, which sound like a renegade tribe of extraterrestrials.
Well, these are the guys that are, you know, occasionally in Mexico you'll see like a dozen heads are thrown into a nightclub, or a dozen bodies are dropped on the.
Well, I'm from concerts, so I've seen that type of thing.
But it does happen basically. So this is the ultra violent cartel that is now basically seems to be taking over from the Sinaloa cartel. They were public rivals to the Sinaloa cartel and the Juarez cartel and such like that. They're incredibly violent. They think nothing of cutting off heads with chainsaws and dumping bodies on the steps of police stations and such like that. They were formed by Guatemalan mercenaries trained by the CIA. Now, the official story about Los Zetas is that they were trained by the USA and Israeli special forces to combat all the other Mexican cartels, and then they went rogue. Right. So what they're expecting us to buy is that they did like Tommy Lee Jones's character in Under Siege. They were trained by the CIA and then went bad.
Yeah, they changed sides.
Of course, it wasn't that they were setting these up so that again, for all the reasons that we've suggested.
All right, Neil. Well, we've run out of time now, but just give viewers your website address.
Yeah, sure. It's www.neilsandersmindcontrol.com, and also on Facebook. Yeah, if you want to get in touch with me via either of those mediums, please drop me a line.
All right, and remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.